45 minutes. No sweat. I'll talk at 120 miles an hour. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here with my wife, Marilyn. We are about as far away from home as we can get and still be in the United States, but we're delighted to be here and share some time with some of you already, and it's a special privilege to speak with you today. So, pardon me if I don't give more words of introduction and pleasantries. I just don't have time. You see the question on the screen. Origins. Is it reasonable to believe in God in this scientific age? The answer to that question on the part of many folks in the scientific community is absolutely not. The more we learn about the natural world, the better we understand it, the less there is a need for some kind of God. So say many. And so the answer to this question by many folks under whom I have studied is those of you who are believers in God better get over it, because we're learning more about how the natural world works and it doesn't require God. That's a pretty typical answer these days. So that's my question to you. Is it reasonable to believe in God in this scientific age? Since we're in a church building and on a Sunday morning, I'm going to read a passage of Scripture as I start to set the groundwork for the direction I'm going to take you this morning during this hour. Romans, the first chapter, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. When I talk about this subject with scientists, I do not use the Bible, because many of them don't even believe in God, much less in the Bible. What I use is the evidence of the natural world, which is what they work with all the time. But what I want you to know, because I suspect in this audience, most everyone in here is a believer in God and a believer that this is the Word of God, as am I. I like to start with the Bible and say to you that the Bible itself makes the same argument I'm going to make this morning. It's the argument from design. This passage says you can know there's a God by knowing the things that are made. If something is made, somebody designed it. The argument is people can become convinced there's a God from examining things that are made. And that's not this book. He's not talking about this book. He's talking about things in the natural world that you can observe. Are you with me? So the argument I'm about to make is a perfectly scriptural argument, but it's not using the Scripture. So don't take offense if for the rest of my time during this hour I'm laying this book aside, because I'm not using this book as the argument. I'm using God's other book, which is the book of the natural world. All right? I would like to take another 15 minutes on that introduction, but I don't have time. So I hope you accept that and nobody takes offense. And for the rest of this hour, we're looking at the natural world and at things that are made as a testimony to the existence of God. I believe it's absolutely more reasonable than ever to believe in God based on the evidence of the natural world. The exact opposite of what a lot of folks think. So, let's talk about this for a few minutes. Obviously, it's a huge subject. I certainly don't claim to know all about it. I was a chemistry teacher for many years, just to give you a little of my background. Studied at Harvard University, chemistry education. I have a doctorate in math education, taught math for many years. So I have a little background on this, and it's been a lifetime subject for me of study and to try to keep up. It's hard to do because there's so much we're learning. But it's a passion for me. So please understand if I get a little passionate during the course of this. All right. So here we go. Are you familiar with SETI? S-E-T-I, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This is a piece of their website. SETI began in the 1960s. I was at Harvard University, and I studied at the feet of a radio astronomer who was heavy into this. SETI is, we're looking for evidence of life in the universe, because the common conception back in the 1960s was that there must be thousands and thousands of other civilizations, intelligent civilizations, even in our own Milky Way galaxy. So surely we'll be able to identify them out there some way or another, and so lots of money was spent searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. May I say to you that 50 years later they have not found one scintilla of evidence for intelligent life in the universe, except us. In spite of all that research, by the way, which for 25 years your tax dollars paid for, and after 25 years of absolutely nothing, they actually stopped using your tax dollars. That's unusual. They use your tax dollars for all kinds of things for which they get nothing. But they stopped using it for that. But they're still researching using private donations and foundations and so forth. So I want you to look what it says. A search for extraterrestrial intelligence is an exploratory science that seeks evidence of life in the universe by looking for some signature of its technology. So what evidence are they looking for? They're looking for some signature of its technology. What does that mean? Virtually all radio SETI experiments have looked for what are now called narrow-band signals. These are radio emissions that are at one spot on the radio dial. Did you listen to the radio come to church this morning? 96.6 FM? Or whatever. When you turn that dial to a specific point on the radio dial, you got information across that signal. That's what they're looking for. Narrow-band radio signals that contain information. And the reason is, narrow-band radio signals are the mark of a purposely built transmitter. You see that? Purposely built transmitter. Nobody believes, class, I'm going to call you my class this morning. Nobody believes, class, that nature itself can produce a transmitter of narrow-band radio signals. So if we were to find such a thing, that's strong evidence that something out there intelligent produced it. You see what I'm saying? That's the argument from design. They're saying such signals from outer space would be overwhelming evidence that there's some intelligent civilization out there. Listen, I don't disagree with that. And I'm perfectly fine with their searching for it. They haven't found anything yet. But I'm not opposed to searching. And I would argue that if they found something like this, that would be pretty good evidence that there was some kind of intelligence out there. Wouldn't tell you what it was, but it could certainly identify something intelligent did this. You see, there's a difference between the question, was this designed intelligently, and who was it that designed it? That's two different questions. Science, I believe, can answer the question, was this designed or not? It may have some limitations on who was the designer. Okay? What I just said there needs another lecture. And most of what I'm going to say today needs another lecture. So please pardon me for the brevity. And don't go to sleep. All right, here we go. Look at that statement again. They can infer intelligent cause without identifying what that intelligence is. That's important. Okay. So what if we received a message from outer space with a language in it that we learn to decode and read? For example, suppose we've got a signal that says, "I'm out here, come find me!" Somebody would start looking, don't you think? Have any of you ever read the book Contact by Gould? No, that wasn't by Gould. I forgot who wrote it. But anyway, the whole point is that we're trying to make contact with intelligent civilizations. which they never have, but in the book they did. It's fiction. And they received a signal from outer space with something intelligent in it. All right, well, what if we received a signal with a language in it that we could decode and read? I'll tell you what would happen. Everybody on Earth in the headlines would be saying, we found the first evidence for some intelligent civilization out there in outer space. So what I want to talk to you about is design at the microscopic level right here on Earth. You don't have to go out outer space looking for it. Just look inside the cell. Not yet. We got a long way to go yet. Just relax. I've got my helper over here who's going to use. We're going to use it. I'm saying to you, class, there are signs of intelligent design right here on Earth. In every living cell, it's full of signs of design, including a language which we've learned to decode and read. Did you know that? Every cell has a language in it. And we know it, have known it for a long time. Here's what Anthony Flew said in 2004. If you don't know Anthony Flew, he was a professor, philosopher, debated creationist like me for years, most of his life, and was absolutely anti-God. In 2004, at 80 years old, he said this: "It now seems to me the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design." And Professor Flew became a believer, at least, that there must be some kind of God, based on the evidence of the natural world. He's not a Bible believer, but he has become a God believer, based on the evidence of the natural world. I'll tell you, I appreciate a fellow at 80 years old who changes his mind about something as significant as that. Research on DNA continues to reveal signs of design. Anthony Flew said, "I have to go where the evidence leads." And it led him to say, there must be some kind of designer here, folks. This did not happen by natural causes. And I would say amen to that. So here's a wonderful book. I'm going to introduce you to several books this morning that if you want to dig more deeply, there's lots of resources these days. When I was at Harvard in the 1960s, I went and spent every spare minute in the library, and there was practically nothing available. They had 65 libraries at that school. There was nothing available written that was worth reading from the creationist standpoint. Now there's lots of good material. You young people in this audience, you live in the most exciting time ever in the history of mankind in terms of what we know about life. Signature in the Cell is a great book by Stephen Meyer. I highly recommend it. He's a philosopher, scientist, and a good writer, by the way. A lot of those scientists aren't very good writers, but he is. And his two seminal works are Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt. If you want to get two books to get started on this subject and really dig deeply, those are the two I'd recommend you start with. And by the way, I'll leave you a bibliography later if you want. Okay. So here we are, folks. Here's the question. Which is more reasonable? Natural causes or intelligent design? And in my mind, as a scientist, that's the way I prefer to describe it. Did these things we observe come about by natural causes, without any intelligent design behind it whatsoever? Or was intelligence required to produce what we observe? That's the way to ask the question to me. And you can ask that based on the evidence, the facts of nature. Let's look at some facts, and then we'll ask the question. Which is more reasonable, natural causes, or was this designed by some kind of intelligence? And guess who's going to be the judge? You. I hope by the time I'm finished, you'll at least have some idea that the natural world gives a grand testimony to the existence of God, which is what I call the intelligent designer. There's a mountain of evidence, and you can feel greatly confident that it is not foolishness in the modern age to believe there's a God behind all of this. So let's talk about life as we know it. In the 1950s, were some of the most seminal works in this subject of all time. This is a class. Can I ask questions? Okay, people can answer.
You might not get it.
They might not get any answers, but does anybody know what happened in 1953 that was life-changing about the subject of how life works at the cellular level? It's a great discovery. Francis Crick and James Watson. Anybody know? No? Okay, I can't wait because I don't have time. Those two guys are given credit and won the Nobel Prize for figuring out the structure of DNA. 1953, folks. Since 1953 to this present day, we have learned more about how life works at the cellular level than in all of the history of mankind before that. By far! And DNA was the door that opened these wonders to us. 1953. Francis Crick was alive a long time after that. He wrote a little book called Life Itself. And in this book, he had several things to say about that, of course. But let me read you a couple of things. Life on Earth as we know it appears to be a synthesis of two macromolecular systems. The proteins, because of their versatility and chemical reactivity, do all the work, but are unable to reproduce themselves in any simple way. The nucleic acids seem rather tailor-made for reproduction, but can achieve rather little else compared to the more elaborate and better equipped proteins. So every living thing, class, has two great sets of molecules in it: proteins and nucleic acids. Here's how he said it. It's structural materials that are proteins that make up the shape and mobility. It's tools and machinery that are the enzymes that make up metabolism. It's blueprints, the genes and the nucleic acids which provide reproduction. The first two are proteins. This is a specialized protein. And the last are the nucleic acids. There is no life, ladies and gentlemen, without two great classes of molecules: proteins and nucleic acids. You got to have them. And the problem is you have to have them both. There is no evidence, class, to this date that life can exist without both. The problem, he says, of the origin of life would be a great deal easier to approach if there were only one family of molecules capable of doing both jobs. But life as we know it employs two families. And it gets all over me when they say life as we know it. May I say to you, class, the only kind of life is the life we have here on earth that we know anything about. So you can philosophize about other forms of life, but nobody has any evidence there is any. So may I say to you, life as we know it is the life forms we are able to get evidence for in this natural world. And all of them have DNA, RNA, and proteins, and they have to work together. Now that's a very simplistic beginning. Structural and enzymes are your proteins, and I'm going to spend just about 3 minutes on proteins. May I ask the apology of every protein? We should spend the next 6 months on proteins. And if you were in my class, we would. Here's what proteins are made of. I'll let you look at that. We'll have a quiz in a few moments. If you were in my class, you would have a pop quiz tomorrow morning. And the pop quiz would be, you better know the names of all those 20. You better know their abbreviations. And I won't make you by tomorrow know their structures, but soon. These are the 20 common amino acids that make up every protein of every living thing, from single cells to you. I lost half of you. I'm going to say that again. These are the 20 common amino acids that make up all proteins for all living things. From single-celled organisms to you. You have the same makeup as one-celled organism. I pause a moment. You know what an evolutionist says about that? Why do you have the same chemistry as every living thing? Because you came from a common ancestry by natural evolutionary processes. You originated in a, the common theory is in this ocean, and you became a single-celled organism first, and over millions of years you evolved into every living thing, and that's why you have a common chemistry. That is not a stupid answer, ladies and gentlemen. That is a reasonable explanation for your common chemistry. But there's another reasonable explanation for that too, and that is you have a common designer. And if he was going to design a system of living things that depend on one another, why wouldn't they have a common chemistry? That looks like good design to me. So that does not answer this question by itself, because there are two significant answers to that question. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, there's two significant answers to any question about how we got here. It either came about by natural causes, or there's somebody messing with it. Intelligent design. Those are the only two answers I know of. If you come up with another one, I'll be glad to hear it. All right, Crick recognizes the problem. And the challenge for an evolutionist is, a theorist who's pure naturalist, how did that happen? How did the first living things get started? When we know very well the chemistry of this. How'd that happen? Well, there's been all kinds of interesting answers to that. None of them are satisfactory, I can tell you. So what this gentleman does, this book was published, let me just remind myself what the publishing date of this was, because Francis Crick, got the Nobel Prize in 1953. This was published in 1981, like itself. And he spends the last 4 chapters in this book saying there may not have been enough time on Earth in 4 billion years to produce living things. In which case, the best answer is somebody sent it here on a spaceship. And so he spends 4 chapters talking about directed panspermia, which is the theory that somebody sent life forms here on spaceships. Is there one scintilla of evidence that somebody spent life here on spaceships? No, there isn't. But Dr. Francis Crick, Nobel Prize winner for DNA, would rather take that answer than God. Period. You read it for yourself. He even talks about what the spaceship might have been like and how it might have been sent here. Beyond belief. It reminds me of Isaiah. It says, seeing they cannot see and hearing they cannot hear. All right, I'm back to this. Every protein is a combination of those 20 amino acids. Did you know that? It's very much like the 26 letters of the alphabet, which make up every word in English. You have an English word, it's a combination of the 26 letters in the alphabet, right? Every protein is a combination of those 20. That's why you have to memorize in class. It's only the foundation for everything else we're going to do. So why are they called amino acids? Well, let me back up here. You see that little group right there called NH3? That's an amine group. See that little OO group right there? That's an acid group. That's an organic acid group. So every one of these has an amine and an organic acid, so they're called amino acids. So that's all the chemistry you're going to get today for that. You're welcome.
Oh, yeah.
But what you need to know is every protein is a combination of those 20. Very much like the alphabet. DNA and RNA, on the other hand, are the nucleic acids. Proteins do all the work. Here's what Francis Crick said about the DNA and the RNA. Please understand, I didn't say this. Is that clear to everybody before I put the next slide up here? I didn't say this. He said, they are the dumb blondes of the biochemical world. Fit mainly for reproduction, but of very little else of much value. Well, that's a completely wrong statement, but that's probably the only thing you'll remember from today. DNA and RNA are like the dumb blondes of the molecular world. They're good for reproduction. Were it not for DNA and RNA class, your cells could not reproduce themselves. Period. But they have to have proteins to make it happen. You listening? The DNA and the RNA code for proteins, but they have to have proteins to make proteins. Listening? So there's the DNA structure that Francis Crick and James Watson discovered in 1953. It's a certain characteristic structure. It's a double helix with crossbars. You see the two the strands wrapping around each other here, and the cross pieces. Therefore, it has the capacity to reproduce itself. And here's a blow-up that shows you a little bit more. Here's the DNA strand wrapped around itself. It comes apart, it unzips, and it exposes two sides here. And on this side, there's a set of molecules, bases we call them, that make up a code. This particular language class has exactly 4 letters: A, C, G, and T. I'm not going to worry about any more of that. There's 4. And with those 4 letters, you can make 3-letter words. And the 3-letter words mean something. So here, class, is a language inside every living cell that we know exactly how it works and what it means. I'm pausing on purpose. I want that to sink in. What if we received a signal from outer space with the genetic code in it? What do you think SETI would think? They would think somebody intelligent out there sent us this signal. They would not think, isn't it interesting what the stars bleeped out? No. They would think intelligent design. But because it's in every living cell on earth, they say, isn't it interesting how nature produced that? Nature produced a language by itself. I don't believe it. And if you were a jury and I were the lawyer trying to convince you, I would say case closed. Every living cell has a language in it. We've learned how to decode and read. That means somebody designed that. But that is not even the beginning of the start of the trying to begin the picture here. Because it's a whole lot more than that. See those letters there? A, C, G, and T? Like if you started reading right here, A, C, G, T, A, G, G, T, A, C, G, T, and so on. Those 3 letters in each case meaning precisely one thing, as I will show you in just a minute. So you're reading a language. And by the way, if you unzip DNA, it does not have A, C, G, and T sticking out there. That's a picture. Those are molecules that have certain chemical characteristics. And here's what it means. This is the genetic code in short. U, C, A, and G. Now, U here replaces the T in RNA, and I'm not going to talk about that, but there's that that T becomes U. So there are the 4 letters, and here are the 4 letters down this side and down this side. So let's take combinations. How about if you had U, U, U? That's your 3-letter word. That means phenylalanine. Let's try another one. How about C-U-G? That one I can pronounce. Cug. That means leucine. How about A-A-A? A-A-A. That's that one. That means stop. No, it doesn't. I'm doing it wrong. A-A-A means lysine. Has anybody caught on yet? I didn't give you time on that previous slide to memorize all the amino acids, but they're all up here. The genetic code, ladies and gentlemen, is a language that codes for the amino acids in every living thing. And there's some redundancy, isn't there? You see phenylalanine more than once. You see cysteine, tryptophan, arginine, histidine, glutamine, asparagine, lysine. All of the 20 amino acids are coded in the genetic code. So there's a 3-letter word for every amino acid, sometimes 2 or 3 genetic, 3-letter words. And why is that important? Because that tells the DNA how to build a protein. Everybody's eyes on me. You're not all looking at me. Here's an amino acid. Here's another one. They hook up with a peptide bond. Now you have 2 amino acids in a row. Then a third one hooks up, and a fourth one, and a fifth one, and a sixth one, and you get a string of amino acids. Okay? That makes a protein. So I'm going to get you to answer me now. And I'm going to tell you that my questions for the next few minutes are all the same answer. The answer is protein. Okay? So when I ask you a question, the answer is protein. What's a string of amino acids, class? A protein. That's right. A bunch of amino acids strung together is a protein. The genetic code tells DNA how to string amino acids together. And when they do it, they build a protein. You ought to be falling out of your chair. It's incredible. And biology teachers teaches this. There's nothing to it, and thinking how wonderful we are for figuring it out. Somebody did that, class. That didn't come about by natural causes. Yes.
I like word pictures. Does the certain combination build a nose or build an ear?
Proteins are different in your body because the sequence of amino acids is different. And yes, there are all kinds of proteins because there's a different sequence. But it's way more complicated than that. Because not only do you have to have a string of amino acids, well, I'm going to tell you this later. You're jumping the gun. Good question, though. Excellent question. All right, here we go. Did you know in this same code, there's a code that says, start reading! And up the top there, you see those? There's 3 codes for stop reading. So eyes up here again. When you're reading across that DNA strand, you remember I read you some 3-letter words? How do you know where to start reading? There's a code that says start reading. Then you start reading 3-letter words. Each 3-letter word is an amino acid, and when you build a string of them, you have a protein. So a string of 3-letter words in the DNA makes a string of amino acids, which makes a protein. Exactly right. That's how that works. That's what the genetic code does. And so how do you know where to stop reading? Where's 3 codes that say stop reading? So you started reading and you stopped reading. In between there's a string of amino acids that makes up a specific protein. What if the amino acid string is different? It's a different protein. Every protein in your body is being built that way at an enormous rate of thousands per second. That's why you get tired just sitting there listening to me. Okay? So you better eat your amino acids. Because if you are proteinless, you're dead. I ask you then again, class, what if we received a message from outer space with the genetic code in it? Listen, there's no question what everybody would say. SETI and everybody else would say, any reasonable person would say, that came from an intelligent source. But not here on Earth, when it's in every living thing. I mean, the common theory is that evolved by natural causes. If you can believe that, I got a bridge to sell you. That's beyond my level of faith. But there's so much more to this than just the genetic code. The code is just the start. So I think this is where this is. You see this right here? DNA, most of it is up in the nucleus of your cells. That's where the information is. The information gets copied. That's called transcription. It gets then processed into mature messenger RNA, and then that migrates, you see that, outside the nuclear wall, and it's picked up by two ducks hugging themselves. Isn't that what that looks like? Those are called ribosomes. They don't look like that. That's a picture. But here's the information that came from the DNA now being read through the ribosomes, and out comes a protein at the bottom. That's called translation. All three of those processes, ladies and gentlemen, are extremely complicated and require, guess what?
Protein.
Louder.
Protein.
Every step requires protein. So now, can you get my thing ready? How much time do we have?
10 minutes.
I'm totally frustrated. Please hurry. No pressure, Jack. Just hurry up. What we're going to show you here is a little video clip from the website for this book. You can go to this website and look at it again. And there's an audio in the background, but I'm better than he is, so I'm doing the audio. But this clip I'm about to show you comes from the website for Signature in a Cell. And it tells you how this is working, kind of like on a cartoon. All right, you ready? Boy, that was quick. Good for you. All right, do you see the DNA here? That's the double helix with cross pieces. See those letters in there? They're not there. They're there for your information. And this you see is a cartoon. Okay, let's now look at the DNA. Keep going. So we're going to now get inside the nucleus of the cell, and we're going to look at the DNA itself. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's very well done. And of course, you may notice that every time you see an A, there's a T, and a C goes with a G. Now, we'll stop right there. You see that blob right there? And I guess you can see the different colors. That's several different proteins. Yes. That glob onto the DNA molecule and ride along it. Okay? So we've got several proteins involved here already. One of them is called ribonuclease. And it rides along the DNA. Kind of like riding along a strand. Okay? Keep going. So here we are. And notice it almost looks like it's flying. That's pretty interesting. Stop. That is what it more looks like. That's a blob of proteins riding along the DNA strand. Down inside that blob, there's stuff happening down in there to make the copies. Okay, so now we're going to go down inside that blob of proteins and look at what's happening inside. So let's go. Here we go. Stop right there. You see the DNA unzipped? Class, did you know DNA cannot unzip without a protein? In fact, without a blob of protein. I just showed you that. It doesn't unzip without help. If DNA doesn't unzip, you never get proteins. May I take a little side trip here? Do you know sometimes it's hard to zip things back up? Have you ever had trouble with your zipper? DNA can also have trouble zipping back up. There is a specific to help it zip back up. Okay? Looks like a design to me. Now, once it's unzipped, you start making a copy of the information. You see those little things? There's 3-letter words right there. And you make copies of it because, well, let's watch what happens here. The RNA is actually a copy. You see, one piece at a time. It's copying. Stop. It's copying each of the pieces of information along here, which is A, C, T, and G. It's coming on and making the mirror image copy of that one at a time. You know the problem with this cartoon? It's way too slow. Watch me. It ought to be going like... And what I did just there was way too slow. So when you're watching this, understand this is multiple slow motion. Go ahead. All right, so we're making the copy, and you see it makes the copy, and then it comes loose. This is your messenger RNA. Stop. There's the messenger RNA being copied down inside here. It now has the information that's on the DNA that is now going to migrate and take somewhere else. You with me? Okay, let's go. Here we go. Here comes the RNA migrating through the cytoplasm in the nucleus, and it comes up to the wall. Stop. You see that cell wall? That's the nuclear wall. You see those holes? That's how the RNA is going to get out. It has to go through the holes. Now, do you think any self-respecting molecule is just going to let anything go through those holes? No, it does not. Guess what guards the hole, class?
Protein.
Thank you very much. That's right. You watch. As he comes up to that hole, go ahead. Look at this thing right here. That is a protein right there. And he says, oh, I recognize you. Come on in. You may now go through. And so stop right there. The RNA goes through the hole. When it gets through, what do you think happens? And on the other side of that hole, there's another protein that does the same thing. Not anything gets through that hole. The protein guards it. Okay, keep going. Now here comes the RNA outside the nuclear cell wall into the cytoplasm of the cell, and it comes over here to be picked up by the ribosome. Watch closely. The ribosome closes in on that information. Stop right there. Think of that as a tape with information on it, and it's now being read through the tape player. That's the ribosome. Now we're going to go inside the ribosome. Go ahead. All right, let's stop right there. You see those three right there? That's that three-letter code. That's ACG or TAG or whatever it is. And then here's the next three letters, here's the next three letters, here's the next three letters. You see these little things look like, what do they look like? Horses? Like, what do you call these horses?
Seahorses?
Yeah, seahorses. Don't they look like seahorses? They don't look anything like that. That's a picture. That's called transfer RNA. Notice at the top, you see that right there? That's the exact mirror image code of that one. And down at the bottom is the appropriate amino acid that goes with that code. Are you with me? So every amino acid has its own specific transfer RNA plus A to help this happen. How many of those amino acids are there, class? 20. So there are 20 specific transfer RNAs. There are 20 specific proteins that work together with this to make these come up and join in here and make a protein. Exactly right. Guess what would happen if you didn't already have the proteins? Nothing. So how did you get the proteins necessary for building proteins without having it all at one time? You tell me. It's a problem. There have been pages and pages and pages written trying to explain that away. Class, that was design. If that wasn't design, nothing was design.
Is this an example of how you
Oops,
build
what
a
did I
nose?
do? Here we go. All right, you're supposed to be managing this. All right, watch. You see what's happening at the bottom here? Each one, stop right there. Each one has brought up its amino acid. They form a peptide bond down here. Did you notice the amino acid is not sitting up here next to the code? It's a long distance away. Well, it's not very long, but it's a distance away. And the code is being transferred by the transfer RNA and the messenger RNA together to help build this down here. And so as each one's brought up, it adds on another amino acid to the chain, and a chain of amino acids is a protein. Right, so keep going. You know the problem with this cartoon? It's way too slow. So they're going to try to speed it up here. Why? Ooh, that's so slow. You guys are pitiful. Come on, move it! Okay, stop. Okay, so the code is being read. Notice down here at the bottom. This is where the protein is coming out. It's the sequence of amino acids being built by this code, by the process I showed you. And it's coming out the bottom here. So go ahead. So there's your protein, and you'll notice as it comes out, it's twisting and shaping. Stop. There's your protein blob. It's not just a string like this, class. Proteins are not just a string. They're a string shaped in a specific two-dimensional and three-dimensional configuration. And if you don't have all three, it doesn't work. So now the protein's been built. Now it comes inside this organelle. Watch what happens here. As it is inside this organelle, inside every cell, it is transformed into its specific three-dimensional structure. May I say it? For which it was designed. And did you know that biology textbooks even say that? And then they say it wasn't designed. Watch, stop. It turned white, but it doesn't do that either. That was just to let you know that it's finished in this configuration. And guess what it took, class, to help make that happen?
Protein.
Exactly right. And now it is released into the cytoplasm to go do the job for which it was designed.
Can you give an example of a design?
How about ribonuclease? I've mentioned that protein to you. It's an enzyme that's used in this process. This is how ribonuclease is built. Ribonuclease then has to migrate into the cell nucleus and become part of that blob which rides along the DNA. But how did you get the first ribonuclease? I'm asking, how did you do that? If there was no DNA and protein complex already working, how'd you get the first RNA? Ribonuclease. It's a problem. I say, this is a phenomenal evidence from the natural world that we have learned about in the last 60 years that says this was designed. It's overwhelming. So, I have another 15 minutes to go, but I'm stopping because I'm already late. But please understand, I'm completely frustrated because there's so much more to tell you. But can I leave you sitting on the edge of your seats and thinking that what I have just told you doesn't touch the hem of the garment of the design that we see everywhere in living things? It is absolutely overwhelming. And still to this day, many people will say, there's no evidence for God in the natural world. And the more we learn, the less we need Him. It's the exact opposite. The more we learn, the more we know there had to be design behind this. So kids in this class, don't you be afraid of science. When I was young, I got scared that if I studied too deeply in science, I'd lose my faith in God. Don't you go there. You keep your eyes open, you be open-minded, and you look at all the evidence, you'll end up, as I have after 50 years, a deeper believer in God than you ever were before. And maybe that's a good place to end. But I hope you'll invite me back for the rest of the series, because it was worth hearing, especially for the young people who are being bombarded from all sides. So thank you for your time. I went over time. Jack,
Thank you. All right.